But if you don't have the confidence to go out there and say that you're gonna do this, uh, how's that gonna look on your clientele?
Founder and CEO of More Insights and Strategy, Patrick Moorhead.
6, 5.
CEO of the Futurum Group,
Daniel Newman.
6, 5.
You know a lot about what's going on, Moorhead?
I think we do.
I'm real glad you're not huffing and puffing, carrying 2 dogs down 39 flights of stairs, evacuating your building, running straight from a building evacuation to surgery, camping out in your daughter's apartment. You really are living the dream these days, Moorhead.
No, I really am, Daniel. So yeah, I live in a condo, and somebody had a huge flood, took out the power grid. We had to evacuate, but small little inconvenience. All of our stuff is in the condo. We need to go up there and get it out. So Paul and I and Pico, went up to the 39th floor. I guess we started on the 6th for the parking garage, and went up there, packed, right, huge backpack on the back, waters with us, and of course, right, I logged it on my watches to get the full experience, see how many carbs I burned from it, and then pick up the dogs and walk downstairs. And man, it's the weirdest thing. I think I hurt my right shoulder. It's just kind of crazy.
Is that the bad shoulder or the good shoulder?
It's the good shoulder.
Compensation.
I had no idea how I could do that, right? So I needed, I'm getting my physical self back in order, right? I'd say I'm 95% on the left shoulder. And then Friday, I got surgery on an inguinal hernia that I've had forever. I mean, grandfather, father, both brothers, uncle, we all have hernia issues. Pico had surgery as well. And I had surgery when I was 22 on the right side, but this was fixing the left. And boy, has technology improved. I mean, when I was 22, it was literally go in there, make an incision, open that bad boy up, and just start, put staples in there to
like laparoscopic, just like a little incision, tiny hole.
No. When I was 22, it was a hardcore. Right? No, now it's robotic. It's a robot called the Da Vinci robot, and it is a human in the loop process. But what they do is I have 3 incisions right here. They fill it full of carbon dioxide, which bloats it, makes it huge. Put the cameras in, put all the equipment in, and then my doctor is looking through a stereoscopic. It's pretty high tech. It's not completely robotic where you press the button and boop beep boop boop beep, and you're done. But no, I mean, I'm day 3. And I got to tell you, it was a lot more painful than I thought before. It took a full 48 hours to get all the gas out of my system because I was out completely. And they gave me some painkillers. I stopped taking those on Saturday, and I'm just on acetaminophen right now. But here we are. I did 3 miles at the out on the lake yesterday, and that helps to get the carbon dioxide out of your system. This is going to be the strangest thing, but the carbon dioxide, it aggravates a nerve that goes all the way up to both of your shoulders. And no, my shoulder issue, not that one, but into my traps. But I'm almost there. My HRV, I'm at like 21% of normal. So my body's still fighting. My body's still struggling, but I'm here, dude. I'm showing up.
Well, that's great, because I'm sure there were tens of people that have just been absolutely waiting to hear what you might have to say about tech things. I'm kidding. But I mean,
but see, I do want to call you out. I'm very thankful for you checking in on me, seeing how I was doing. I mean, my immediate family, my dad and my stepmom, my brothers were like never checked in. I mean, but that is the family that I came from, right? I mean, we were such hard, man. It's just that is me.
Well, I mean, it was just a lot. You had been through a lot. I mean, the evacuation was just absolutely just, you know, rain pouring down on your head right before you had to go do this. And then, of course, I did want to make sure there was no leaks in the garage because for personal reasons, making sure that nothing's going on on the 6th. Hadn't heard for sure, but I'm guessing we're okay. Um,
Yeah, we're okay. We're okay. Yeah, Dan and I share a car,
I
and
may
it's a
have a
nice.
car in that garage that I would care about if something had happened to it. Just another headache I don't need right now. But hey, listen, I'm glad you're back. I think that coming out on a Friday, coming back on Monday, being ready to pop. But you also had a big week. I mean, you were in DC. Um, you were in the room with. It had to be the biggest power vacuum I've ever seen in terms of the world's most powerful people in the US, all in one room, talking about making AI work. Now, Pat, like, we're going to dive into this, but what a cool experience, right? I mean,
Yeah, Dan, I mean, it was crazy. I can't tell you who invited me, but this person is very powerful and is in the administration. And what I'm going to do? Say, well, maybe, or I don't know. Let me get back to you. But it was pretty cool. It's fifth row.
I know you, buddy. Like, when you don't want to travel, you don't travel. So, the fact is you really stepped up to figure out how to make this work and show up for President Trump. I mean, because sometimes, like, when you have a week at home, you're not up for moving. I'm kidding. But listen, what a great opportunity. I will wait someday, everybody out there, you and I will all find out together who the powerful person is behind the curtain that's pulling the wand, that's bringing the Moorhead to DC. And who knows, maybe the next administration, Pat, you will be the AI czar. Never know. Never know. All right, we got a great show. We got a lot to cover. We're going to do an extra long decode diving into winning the AI race because there was so much to cover there and so much interest in this topic. And we'll tap on the EU and China tariff news from the weekend. We've got a flip in store that we think is going to be a whole lot of fun. Speaking of that Apple Watch not registering your flights of stairs, some of us think Apple may be doomed. Some of us don't. And some of us may think something and we're going to argue what we don't think because that's the fun part of doing the flip. And then we're going to get to a lot of bulls and bears. We had a big week of earnings last week. A lot to cover on what happened. And then, of course, we've got a big week this week. So a lot to cover on what's going to happen. So we're going to get it all done. We're going to get it tuned in, strap in, but let's get after it, Pat, with the decode. All right, buddy. I've got a lot to say about this, but I want this to be all you because I'm going to give you like, hey, here's the floor, rock and roll. You were in the room hearing this stuff as it broke, Pat. What was the big gist, themes, topics that you heard when you were in the room there with President Trump in DC?
Yeah, so this was the in-person version of this 20-page, 90 action plan that came out that was all about winning, right? Trump is all about winning. We're going to win here, we're going to win there. And this was about the US winning the AI race. And there were three pillars, right? Accelerating AI innovation, building American AI infrastructure, and then what they call lead in international AI diplomacy and security was really about exporting. Okay. How do we export American AI out there? And then, you had some overall principles that they started off with. By the way, you could tell that government people did not write this, but business people did. There were three executive orders that were actually signed at the event. One was essentially accelerating data center permitting, promoting the export of American AI technology, and then what they call it preventing woke AI in the federal government, which I think is super polarizing. But to me, models that are objective and neutral and not introducing any bias, any right wing bias or left wing bias. So they brought up a lot of speakers. I mean, my gosh, pretty much a who's who. You had VCs, you had Vice President Vance, you had Donald Trump as well. So you had Vance up front, Trump on the end. You had Lisa Su, you had Jensen Huang, you had the leaders of some really interesting robotic manufacturing companies. MP Materials CEO that went through the whole rare earth mineral trade-offs and the challenge. They just got a huge investment from Apple, but also from the federal government. You had the all in guys were moderating the entire thing, and some really hard questions were asked, and that's one thing that I love. You had Besant and Lutnick show up. And I think for this audience, one of the most interesting things that I think I walked away with was export controls. Lutnick talked about the who and the performance. What I'm hoping is that actually cluster size, and I hope that that means performance. But I'm feeling more and more bullish that we might see some higher end GPUs be exported to China, and probably through a cloud model, not in China. And then, second of all, some of the rules about sending stuff to Portugal, right? I think we're going to have a reduced friction. Final comment here: this wasn't an action plan, like Daniel. I know I consider action plans, which are dates that things are going to get done. What's the metric? Um, Trump can't get all of this done through executive orders, so he has to get other people and the entire White House, and might even need congressional approval on some of the things that this action plan is recommending.
So, first of all, this was really important. And you've heard me for a while sort of going on. I think I've probably used the same phrase on every network and every podcast about the next multiple decades of global economic and technology leadership are dependent on winning AI. So there's a lot of debate on how that's done. We've had a lot of kind of FUD in the market for some time. The whole China, Huawei, DeepSeek really created a lot of consternation about what's going to happen next. We know China is a formidable competitor in anything that it does, but we also know that we've been sort of told things like China's going to catch us in the next 5 minutes because Huawei is as good as Nvidia, and like you hear this stuff, and then you hear DeepSeek is going to displace OpenAI. And bottom line is what I did hear here was the U.S. does understand that going fast is more important than protectionism. But I still get the sense from everything I read, and I was not in the room, not invited, whoever invited Pat, but that we are going to prioritize innovation, but we are going to still be careful. We are still going to be careful with how we democratize our technologies, the leading technologies, the best AI technologies in the world, and make them available to every part of the world, or as we like to call it, AI diffusion. I also think that, there was a couple of key tenets. It was one, remove red tape. So this removing red tape is everything from deregulation and energy, which we haven't talked a lot about, but we do know if there's one reason China really can catch us, it's because it has exponentially more energy available to it, and it does not care about hurting anyone's feelings or trying to use windmills to power its, the data centers of its future. We had there was a term in this whole thing called "build it here." Build it here is interesting, but it's also one of those things that we're still in this kind of difficult juxtaposition, because it's like, yes, TSMC will make its chips here, and Samsung will make its chips here. But where's Intel? I still think it's really interesting that Intel was almost a also ran, if a mentioned at all. And you and I will talk later. We saw Intel's earnings last week, and we both had the chance to have a chat with Lip-Bu Tan. And this is going to be a really interesting debate, but we're not really building it here with American technology and American IP unless it's Intel or another US-based foundry. So that's a big thing. And the third thing, the one thing that we didn't really talk about, or Pat, you didn't really talk too much about in your sort of opening salvo here, is the train the workforce, use and empower with AI, develop skills for the future. This one is the one that to me is increasingly becoming more muddy. I mean, last week, I think Microsoft got rid of its entire legal team, less than 7 years of experience, its junior workforce. We're seeing that more and more across different enterprises. We're seeing where efficiencies are being gained and headcounts are being reduced and eliminated. What we're not seeing yet clearly is where the jobs are being created. We know that the most senior and competent, capable developers will always have work. But what about the ones that used to have years to come in and do small code, support, QA, things that now AI tools are increasingly taking on more and more for companies. So I think that's one that we're going to need to be listening a lot more for because, while I do think we can deregulate, I think that's very much part of the Trump administration. I do think that we can certainly get trade deals done and convince outside countries, leaders in foundry fabrication equipment to do more manufacturing here. We still have a challenge to get our own country and our own companies, leaders to manufacture here. But I do think there's a massive gap in terms of workforce development and how we're going to actually get people ready to be successful in this. So I'll hold there, but this overall super bullish for tech, but a lot to be done.
A complete miss. First of all, Intel not showing up. But secondly, this thought that just building something on American soil is good and we can call it a day. You had mentioned it previously, just to elucidate on that. Foundries do two things. They create intellectual IP for different nodes, and they build stuff based on that node. All the intellectual property is done in Taiwan, and you have manufacturing that is cut across multiple areas. But we are only focused on this. We are completely screwed if China invades Taiwan and those 10,000 IP creators go away. Well, essentially, we're gonna just stop in time. And you might be asking, well, Pat, what's the answer to that? Well, we have debated this on the pod before, but to me, first and foremost, Intel has to deliver the goods, but the designers have to be incented to take the risk to have a parallel design path, creating mask sets for both Intel and TSMC. On the other side of my mouth, I will say that there is a lot of similar equipment between TSMC and Intel. And hypothetically, you could run Intel IP inside of TSMC foundries, but if you haven't done the design for it, let's say if you're an NVIDIA, you're not going to get chips for a very long time, and you are still frozen in time. So when the administration has asked me about what I think they should do, it's very clear. Incent the designers to do this. Give them the money to create the mask set, the additional design to go off and do that. And it is in the hundreds and millions of dollars.
Is that being addressed at all, you think, by Ramp C?
I believe that Ramp C is 100% about the DoD, another three-letter acronym, chip manufacturers.
But test chips on 18A for the DoD. It is one way that they're able to test chips for instance, on 18A. But we also kind of know now 18A is not going to be an outside node, so we can.
Yeah. But Dan, see, the check needs to be sent to NVIDIA or Qualcomm or Apple or Broadcom or somebody like that, as opposed to the check going to Intel. And hey, on the jobs front, Vance, he threw Microsoft under the bus, right? His comment was essentially, I haven't talked to Microsoft yet about them laying off 9,000 people, but continuing to ramp up H-1B visas. But he said, I will be chatting with them. And that got a lot of conversation. And Satya Nadella actually put out an internal email trying to address all of these things. But just another example of the friction that AI is going to be causing. And I think this is about 5% of the volume control that I think we're going to see in the future when we start seeing mass layoffs based on AI.
Yeah, I do think we are going to have this interesting inflection where we see more efficiencies than gains. But I do think, like we've always say, the favorite CEO ism right now is every revolution has created more jobs. That's that they all like to say it right now. But then you also see really bullish CEOs talking about sort of hiring plateaus or freezes, even like ones that had basically said we'll never lay people off are now saying things like we may not hire as aggressively, we may slow down. And then, of course, other companies are clearly driving efficiency. So it's going to be an interesting period of time. It's also because of how fast we're moving. But the one thing I will say, and Pat, this is my ask of you before we talk a little bit about tariffs here, but did he do enough? Is this enough? Like you said, he can't get it all done with executive order, but can he get, you think, now that you've spent the time, is what's in this enough? Can we get it done?
Yeah, I think we can. And everything has to have a start. And there's a start, there's a beginning, middle chapters, and the end. And this is what's required to get it going. One of the reasons that I think this was such a positive move is that China came out last night with its own AI plan. And once you have your biggest rival responding to you, then I think it means that you're making a move. I think some of the more controversial ones, actually everything will be controversial, but it's so funny. Lutnick was or Besant was talking about, my gosh, I needed to put a pipe somewhere different in a foundry or an energy company, and it sets it back 40 days. That stuff's got to stop. So everything will be debated. He's got to get this done before the midterms. We need to start to see the flywheel moving, and then I think most Americans will be on board.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of America, trade will fail. The U.S. will go into extraordinary, inflation, hyperinflation. There will be no goods. Store shelves will be empty. Unemployment will rise rapidly. We will be in a deep, deep recession in a matter of days, weeks, months. Well, that was over almost 4 months ago on Liberation Day. And yes, some people will point to the taco trade or Trump always caves or whatever, or, chickens out or whatever they say. But Pat, here we are. We've now got deals, it looks like, with many parts of Asia. We just announced that the EU, China's got a framework. It's being extended. India's moved along. Japan has a strong, almost nearly completed framework. The UK deal is done. And by the way, we had inflows that exceeded outflows. We had a budget surplus for the first time, largely attributable to funds raised from tariffs. I mean, before we talk about the new deals, what's going on? Why are we not seeing bread lines and $70 gasoline yet? And why are t-shirts not $250 unless you want a Louis Vuitton t-shirt? Why isn't this failing so badly? What's going on?
Yeah, a couple of things going on. First and foremost, Trump pulled back on some of the most impactful ones, right? We don't have tariffs on chips, and that keeps the tech market screaming. And the second thing is on areas that I think people would go absolutely bananas on, like we get most of our antibiotics from China, and we get a lot of our medicine from the EU. Those were 0%. So I think Trump intelligently did some nips and tucks to keep us from going in spiral. The other thing is we just got more efficient in our supply chains. People figure this stuff out, right? And whether it's Apple moving more stuff into Vietnam, whether it's somebody, maybe finding a new supplier who would be willing to eat it a lot more. And we just didn't pass a lot of these prices on to the end consumer, even if there was a cost increase. And I think it'll be interesting to see the industrials. The thing that still amazes me is the wholesale price index, right? You have the consumer price index and you have the wholesale. The wholesale really didn't bump that much. And that, Daniel, I still don't fully understand. The only thing that can explain that is the people who are selling the grain to the bread maker did not increase their prices.
Well, bottom line though is I agree with you about, there is still the 232 investigation. There is still possibilities things like pharmaceutical and chips could have some type of impact. There was the agreements that were already in place with Mexico and Canada that kind of had some caveats for things like server building and different manufacturing complete product that was also taken out of the deal or left intact to not hit pricing on those things, Pat. But like, I'm just talking about the ships full of stuff, just stuff. The 37 dolls that our kids had to own, and Trump said it's okay to have 3 or whatever. Remember that? But like, I mean, I go to the store and stuff is expensive. Inflation's been high for a long time, but it hasn't gone up more. It just hasn't. Things aren't more than they were. And I'm sure there are a few odds and ends, and I'm sure there are some small businesses, and I don't want to sound crass about like small companies that had big hits on tariff that have been hammered by this deal. But our economy is in good shape. The S&P's at all-time high day after day. Jobs have remained largely stable. Price indexes have stayed largely within the range. Interest rates have stayed largely intact. Just, and we're driving in a budget surplus. And by the way, I tweeted something about this yesterday. I basically said we have no chance of solving our problems with raising taxes and revenues. Like there aren't enough billionaires and wealthy people to raise taxes on anymore to cover the type of spending we're doing. I'm not saying you couldn't do it with some fiscal management, meaning if we cut and actually manage the whole budget and then wanted to raise taxes. But you're also seeing lots of problems, like in London, where they raised taxes again on wealthy people. And what have happened? Wealthy people have fled. I mean, so there is this kind of really, as long as there's going to be places for those people to go, you can only raise taxes so much, or eventually you will lose the people that are funding. I think the wealthiest few percent fund like 90% of the tax base. So it's a crazy issue. But the EU, Pat, I mean, look, it was a lot of hot takes, a lot of end of the world stuff. They landed on 15% on most exports, and I think 0 on imports. They're going to they committed almost $1 trillion, $750 billion in energy and $600 billion in investments in arms. So they brought in 1.3 trillion in commitments to spend for Europe to spend in the U.S. while taking in 50% tariffs. And they did leave a few things up: aircraft, chemicals, APIs for pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and some of the agricultural stuff in place. Tariff stuff remains high, Pat. But I'm just saying in the end, like, what point do the economists, the University of Michigan, the Atlanta Fed, these ones that just claim these ridiculous, do they ever raise their hands and be like, whoops, yeah, we got this wrong? Or are we going to always be so partisan about all this stuff that it's just going to be like, we will go to death fighting for this, even if it ends up being good for us?
I think they got so skewered based on the Biden's and initially Trump's spending. They got that wrong, and I think because they don't have, what's the right word, data that they can count on, which I totally understand. This thing seems to change every day or week. They go the conservative route, or they go the we're going to be worst case route. Yeah. So I don't agree with it, but I understand how we got here.
Totally. So we've got a lot to cover, not a lot of time before I've got to break off and do some corporate BS. China extended 90 more days, so they're still working. And that, of course, was one of the biggest risks as well. But remember, there are tariffs between the U.S. and China. It's not 0. It's just not 191% or whatever. But in the iPad, it was kind of like the make it big, make it shocking, make it stunning, and then bring it back to something that was still pretty big. And everybody's like, yay.
Hey, kind of like it was a negotiation.
Oh my God. Art of the deal or whatever they say. All right, my man. Look, you know me. Actually, you and I are both kind of perma bears about Apple in many ways, but in the end of the exercise, there's this question that's going around: is Apple doomed? Is Apple going to be doomed? So in this week's flip, I think you and I need to debate: is it over for Apple? So you're saying it's not over, and I'm gonna have to take it on. So I will go first. All right. How about that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. The risks are palpable for Apple. I mean, in the beginning of the year, they've got we'll just start with the stuff that could actually hurt them that's still unknown. Their entire supply chain is dependent on China, and we know we have an administration that doesn't care for that. They tried to move to India, but that end around isn't going to work out so well. Bringing their stuff to the Americas is going to be incredibly expensive. But this isn't really the problem for Apple. This is a company that has massive balance sheet. It spent $600 billion buying its own stock back over the past several years, while basically delivering almost zero innovation, unless you call a giant headset that people use to watch porn as innovation, or perhaps you want to get another phone with an AI feature that actually doesn't work. So you have to lend your capabilities over to OpenAI. So innovation is completely lacked, but hey, they do have a credit card now, so that's pretty cool. But the other real problem with Apple is a real question that needs to be asked in a company that's completely failed to innovate, failing on the car, failing on the headset, failing to bring AI to the handset in a way that's actually disruptive. And now you got a question is the handset even going to be the way people work? My bet is in the next 5 years, the handset begins a steady decline to no longer being the number one way that we interact with our information in the world, as we see new form factors, those that people like myself aren't even intelligent enough to know what they might be. But it could be a pin, it could be a wearable, it could be a contact lens, it could be some other device. And Apple is already showing signs of not being able to get this done. Its top AI researchers are fleeing, leaving for the greener pastures and hundreds of millions of dollars offered by Meta, while its top executives, including its COO, are stepping away because, well, it has no answers for the company's lack of innovation. And meanwhile, at the helm, Tim Cook, a great manager of the business, clearly someone that knows supply chain and operations well, but hasn't really brought a single innovative technological product or service to market in his tenure as CEO. And yet the board is fully confident in him. Why? Because he continues to print a cash machine. But I'll tell you this, Pat. In the years of companies like Blockbuster and BlackBerry, there was no point in which they were like, oh, that Netflix is going to definitely put us out of business. Or BlackBerry said, oh, no one's ever going to use a touch panel to send an email. We've got this market locked. Well, I hear a lot of that right now about Apple. They have 2.2 billion plus users in their install base. They will never leave. That's what Blockbuster said. That's what BlackBerry said. And surely that's what Kodak said when they thought that they would be fine staying with print film just a little bit longer. But Apple's completely missed the bus on AI. They are continuing to struggle. They're no longer a growth company. They're a value company with a dividend, and their entire focus is on keeping the float low on their shares. So maybe they'll be around a while longer. And heck, Kodak's still around, and so is Xerox. But these aren't the companies that they once were. And it's almost all but certain at this point, Pat, that Apple will be one of those companies as the next generation of tech disruptors in the AI era take it over.
Yeah, that was a pretty good job. I mean, it's completely off base, but I do believe that Apple's going to figure out AI, and boy, do they have a long time to ultimately figure it out. Let's look at today. Like, what are the AI applications that are capturing our imagination, right? They're all based on apps like a Chat GPT app or a Perplexity app that you and I and millions of others both use on our phones. And then when it comes to the desktop, it's primarily a web interface. Every Apple iPhone can do AI through those two modalities. And the only thing what Apple could do to give these AI programs, people who are better at it today, would be to give it access API access in a way that it normally doesn't do for a very long time. So, for instance, they could probably Pico could probably write this code to be able to use ChatGPT to pretty much do everything on the iPhone that you needed it to do. So that's the kind of a worst case if you had to get it fast. And then I look at these alternatives that potentially disrupt the smartphone. I mean, what is it going to be like a pendant? As much as we like to fantasize that having a headless, meaning not having a display pendant, is going to be a great idea, how many people are using voice mode anyways on there compared to what they're doing on the display? Well, not a ton. And then if you have a pendant with a small display, isn't it kind of like a smartphone without the radio in it? It probably is, but it would have to have the radio to be able to communicate if you're not going to buy a smartphone. So a lot of people talk about the future of these devices, but I just think it cuts across what people really want, and people, consumers in particular, don't like very quick change. Let's talk loyalty, right? Let's just say somebody on the smartphone side comes around and does it just dramatically better. I mean, to be brutally honest, I mean, Samsung is doing it a heck of a lot better. Their image editing and generative AI fill capabilities, you are today looking at Apple, which is like in kindergarten, and Samsung is in high school or college right now. It's absolutely incredible. Samsung so far has not increased market share based on Apple stumbling. And I think what that says is that so few consumers are demanding it to happen. So let's just say that my thesis is Apple has 3 to 5 years to figure it out. They've hired cloud infrastructure pros from companies like Google, a few that I know personally from Google. They are doing their own chips. Rumor is that it's a Broadcom based chip for their data center. Today, they're doing some clunky putting a Mac in the cloud operation, which doesn't seem to be very efficient. So, whether it's today, whether it's midterm or the future, I think Apple has AI covered as much as they need to do. And, let's say they lose, 5% share in places that don't mind the green bubble. You're still not looking at a catastrophic ending. And then once they do get their AI act together, the thesis that they could grow even more means that this company is off to the races and their stock is probably going to go absolutely crazy.
All right. So when are you going to start debating? I didn't hear anything in there. That was a debate. Just kidding. That was fun. It's funny when you debate that, though, Pat, because it's like you can be bearish on something, but also acknowledge that the company has a very real moat. And that's been the case. But single digit growth is not exciting. It is definitely in this particular era with so much tailwind. $1 trillion gap now is built between NVIDIA and Apple in terms of valuation. There's $1 trillion gap. That was fun. All right, man, we had a ton go on last week on in the market. We had a ton of earnings. We're going to have a ton more earnings. Pat, why don't you and I do kind of we don't have a ton of time. Let's do a little bit of a rapid rundown of some of the biggest earnings of last week. And of course, you and I were broadly covered this in the media and the press and across social. So you'll get it from us here. And if you don't get enough of it here, check out our X pages. We're both, shilling our victory laps across the internet. And then, you can catch us on TV as well. But let's hit some bulls and bears. All right, so rapid fire. I'll go first. Tesla. Nobody expected it to be great. Wasn't great, but yet the stock's still hanging in there. Because why? Because nobody treats this company like a car company. Everybody treats it like an AI company, physical AI, robotics, autonomy, energy. And yet, as its margins erode, its unit volume goes down, its innovation of its products continue to stagnate. From a car standpoint, this is probably a lesson in what Apple needs to do to change its narrative and become cool again. It trades at over $1 trillion, has the highest forward PE ratio in the market, but yet, as of right now, really isn't doing much to earn its keep, except for the fact that people say 5 and 10 years out, it probably, besides NVIDIA, has the biggest play in physical AI. I don't know if you have anything you want to add there, Pat, or want to just hit the next one.
No, I do want to add on Tesla. What are the engineers working on? So, Model 4 AI came out, or Generation 4 electronics came out with virtually no changes to the body style. The body style is old, the body style is aged, and I am still very doubtful that they can get it nearly as safe as what Google is doing on there. And I think that that's weighing on it. And I think Wall Street is just being absolutely charitable to the company right now. Yeah, I mean, IBM came in, and one thing I really like about what they're doing is this: they actually put an AI number out there, right? Unlike ServiceNow, they put an AI backlog number out. We are going to talk about ServiceNow a little bit later, who talks about a percent growth, but they put it out there. The challenge here was that they didn't hit overall on software, which I just thought was interesting. There's a little bit of chatter about potential budget challenges inside of the federal government, but I think they worked that through. It's a very small percentage of what they do. But yeah, they beat on revenue, EPS, cash flow, but the software segment missed. I was still very impressed with hybrid cloud and Red Hat at 16% growth. I think that is absolutely phenomenal. I think the good news, bad news, is that IBM is looked at as an AI stock, potential AI stock now, and anything contrary to the dialogue, it gets hit, and they got hit between 4 and 8% based on that.
Yeah, I thought IBM did a good job. They had a big number from their infrastructure because of the Z cycle.
I know. Can you believe that? 70%, and they only ship for 3 weeks.
Yeah, crazy. It's going to be big, and that just goes to show how critical that technology is to running the world's transactions. But it also shows how IBM's hitting its, hit around that 5+% model. And again, 5+% growth for IBM is really, really good. That's the thing. Like, you got to understand the company, but it's been all-time high after all-time high. It's been done on great management. Kudos to Jim Kavanaugh, the CFO, and Arvind Krishna, who we regularly interact with, and just on executing in the business. Let's talk a little bit about Alphabet, Pat. You ribbed me a little bit about me being such a Google bull, and what is it, why? So let me just give you the thesis here. Best vertically integrated stack in AI outside of NVIDIA, has put the work in over a decade now to acquire, build the research organization and the infrastructure and the solutions, and has the stickiness. A lot of people in the market want to call it the end of search, but the end of search to me seems a lot less risky than the end of handsets, because Google has all the technology to basically pivot its users, and it's doing so. So that kind of bump in the road where people are like, oh, search is going down and everyone's moving to OpenAI. Well, there was one number for like 1 month where it went down like 0.01%, and everyone claimed the world. And then it's on its way back up. So people haven't completely abandoned search, and adding generative or AI into search, and now adding it into YouTube, and adding it into Workspace, and adding it into your cloud is a really, really sticky business model. You're seeing their large deals go up. They're getting more significant sized projects in their growth rate in cloud continues to be really, really strong. I mean, there is some challenges with ads, but I just think the company is really sticky. I think the regulation risk is overstated. And I think the continued ability to print cash while being innovative, while investing in Waymo, while investing in chip development, while investing in AI research is just much better than the market gives it credit for. So I thought the company had a really, really good result, and I think it earned the run up that it had into earnings.
Yeah, getting to that $50 billion annual run rate for Google Cloud is so impressive. I mean, what was it? 3 years ago, people were questioning their existence. Would they deprecate it? Be on the bone pile of Google discontinued products. Now look at them there. And, they built it in a couple ways. First of all, they led where they were really good at. And first place was data and analytics, right? They have the largest data estate literally on the planet, right? And they have more data centers on the planet than anybody else. And they found a way to make that appealing to businesses. And then you add on AI, where I would, anybody remember Google image search, right? That was created by Google, leveraging object recognition technology from the University of Toronto. They wrote the seminal white paper on transformers, which is essentially bringing in generative AI. And they walk this tightrope. It's funny. Google was a startup losing a ton of money when Yahoo and all of the portals were making a ton of ad money. And they have the same play being run against them by companies like Perplexity and OpenAI. And they have to bring innovative technologies to the table at a decent cost. And they're doing that with TPUs. So, yeah, I was always bullish on Google. It was just, the amount of your tweets out there for Google was the only thing I was ribbing you on.
I know. I was just kidding. I just meant like it's like sometimes you find something that your audience appreciates and you're kind of just turning and scratching at it and scratching at it and scratching at it, because I just think the company is surprisingly misunderstood for how successful and performant it has been, Pat. Talk about connecting AI. How about the network, T-Mobile US? What'd you see there?
Yeah, so they don't get talked about a lot compared to the AI plays just because of AI, but they're absolutely running over AT&T and Verizon. I mean, they were up 9% after their earnings, which just has a string of improvements. And essentially, it gets down to these wireless KPIs, which are all about how many prepaid and postpaid that they bring on. And also they continue to have a moat, which is a superior network that was brought in with the combination of T-Mobile and Sprint years ago. They were first with 5G, first with having applications that actually use some of the key technological features in 5G. So yeah, they're crushing it.
Yeah, and they continue to strong, solid company, strong performance. And by the way, my carrier. So I always say, put your money where your mouth is. What are you carrying? What are you carrying? So ServiceNow continued its very, very, very strong performances. To your point earlier, yes, there could be more said on how AI is directly impacting the business, but it maintains probably somewhere around 2 to 2.5 times faster subscription growth rate than the rest of the SaaS businesses, the sizable SaaS businesses out there. It was like I said, it was one of those kind of solid batting performances. They didn't have any of those crazy partnership announcements, but they had a steady, continuing their partnerships with NVIDIA, which, by the way, is using their platform now for HR. So NVIDIA and ServiceNow is getting tighter, never a bad. I think they closed 89 deals over $1 million net ACV, and now have 528 customers with over 5 million. So big customers. They're growing their biggest deals now. I think it was something like 30% growth in over 20 million, and they're keeping the renewal rates at 98%. So this is a company that we see as seminal to the AI transition, lacking the technical debt of some of the other SaaS companies that have very difficult and sticky models that are not going to be able to move to consumption. But that's really what I'm looking for, Pat, from this company is, can they move to a consumption-based subscription pricing that's more token and outcome-driven versus user-driven? Someone's going to have to do this first. I think ServiceNow has a good opportunity, but again, none of these companies want to cannibalize their business. But solid overall performance. Of course, in my conversation with CEO Bill McDermott, always optimistic. He's always incredibly bullish about where things are heading. But after so many quarters in a row of execution, I guess how can you blame him?
Yeah, this was almost a flawless earnings. I mean, literally, I can't even spot lowlights. I do want to pick the scab of AI, though. I mean, we have companies like IBM that are putting out billion-dollar backlog numbers for AI and talking about what they did in the quarter. Why isn't ServiceNow doing this if they're crushing it so much in AI? I have a thesis, and maybe it's going to be controversial, that their revenue growth is not actually being driven by AI. There is big AI growth, but it's really driven by some of the new places that they're in. What they're doing with CSM, what they're doing in HR. Two metrics that do indicate AI growth is workflow data fabric and RaptorDB, right? These are the precursors to do AI, and we saw the same thing with companies like ServiceNow and also SAP. And by the way, this isn't to take anything away from the company at all. My gosh, they crushed it. But I am not convinced that their amazing financials are being driven by AI.
So your readout on it that it's TAM expansion and TAM driving more subscription revenue
And new products too, right? What they're doing in CSM, how they're
CRM, CSM, HR. So basically, the pivot to workflow is driving customers to move some of their current way of doing things to ServiceNow, which is bringing expanded ACV with each customer. But the question is, how much of that's directly attributed because of what they're doing with AI?
That's right. That's exactly right. And I do understand the challenge, like what is AI and what's not. Hey, does old machine learning that we were doing 7 years ago count as AI? Or does it have to be generative AI? IBM in writing says what they're doing in generative AI. So one thing ServiceNow strategically, they might not have to because nobody else is doing this in software. SAP's not doing it. Salesforce is not doing it. Adobe surely isn't doing it. But wouldn't it be wild though, Daniel, to think of that? Okay, SAP, Salesforce, SAP are not putting specific numbers out there, and either is ServiceNow, but somehow ServiceNow is driving it through AI. Anyways, I'll leave that there.
Sometimes it's just the stories that we tell. All right, we got just a minute or two because I've got to go do corporate meetings, my favorite things. But Pat, I want to wrap this up with a tough one. Intel.
Yeah, listen, they beat on revenue. They met on EPS, but quite frankly, put all of that stuff aside. They dropped a bombshell on the call that essentially said if they don't have customers lined up for 14A, they're not going to do it. And after I heard it on CNBC today, right? Kramer lambasting, saying the government gave money to Intel and they shouldn't have done it. But macro, pragmatically, I understand it, okay? Which says I'm not going to put all this capex in unless I'm sure the people are going to come in. But if you don't have the confidence to go out there and say that you're gonna do this, how's that going to look on your clientele? That means you don't have confidence. One of the things that I'm trying to drive with the administration is you need to be motivating the chip designers to spend the money to do a design on 14A, or they're just not going to do it. I don't think any of the chip designers care about a potential China invasion of Taiwan. What they care is about low risk and crushing it on performance. So they need some motivation. The other thing that's said is that they're going to be laying off. I guess the total number, I think it was it 25,000 people. So I guess that would mean they were at a little over 100 That would mean since their peak, they would be down 25% overall. I think what we heard when we were on the conference, we were on the call with Lip-Bu and company, was they were about halfway through. And final comment on here, we don't yet know what the impact is going to be to product roadmap or product features. I haven't heard anything about their 2026 AI data center GPU. It wasn't mentioned even up on stage when Lip-Bu made his first on-stage appearance out there in Las Vegas that you and I had attended.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an inference chip. I think something built on Gaudi. I think the 18A to 14A news is probably the biggest thing. Just the kind of, it wasn't just really an earnings note as much as it was just kind of news around their earnings, but just that 18A is an internal node now, a long node, and it's going to be 14A, and it's going to be 2 to 3 more years before they're going to fill the foundries with outside. And you're absolutely right, Pat. They've got to incent these companies to want to work with Intel. The governance thing was a step. I really thought all this regulation that was being put into place in the U.S. to drive more manufacturing here could have absolutely created the environment for having to use Intel. Again, maybe against some of their will, but if we want a U.S. chip champion at the leading edge, it's not going to happen because everybody just likes each other and wants to hang out at dinner, eat guacamole. They're going to have to make something, a big incentive for these companies to risk yield, to risk performance, to risk, all the cost of running 2 foundries, because TSMC, they may have all this price inelasticity, but they deliver. And these companies feel very confident when they go to TSMC, they're going to get the performance and the yield that you mentioned. All right, buddy, I got to run. I got a call to get on. I appreciate everybody out there. Thanks so much. Episode 269. We are back. Pat is almost back to full health, full flex all day long. We'll see you all back next week.